Okay, so let's get into sort of developing the actual model that we're going to be using. Okay, and the model focuses on two variables. It focuses on real output and something that we call the average price, which I learned as the price level. And so that's most likely going to be the phrase or the term that I use it for. But if you ever see average price, it's the same thing as the price level. Okay. Now, real output is basically just GDP. It's the total value, or it's the value of the total amount of goods and services, of final goods and services, that is being produced at any given time. But what the average price is it's basically an average of all the prices that you see like on the stickers or on the menus or anything like that. Right now, really, it's an average of something like 211 different prices, but that's a whole separate issue for another lesson, perhaps. Right. But basically, if you want to get sort of an intuitive sense of what the price level is, it's sort of like a general sense of where prices are on average. Right. So when grandma used to tell you about how candy cost a nickel back in her day, what we would say is that the price level back then was very low compared to today's price level. It's not the case that candy was actually cheaper. It's just that the price level was lower for grandma than it is for you and I. Okay, so it's nothing there. You can also think of the price level as like a sense of inflation. Okay, now, so which is exactly what's happened since grandma's time, right? Inflation has raised the overall price level. Okay, so we can think of inflation as a an increase in the overall price level. Okay. No, it's just saying that all prices have gone up by roughly, the same percentage over the last, 50, 80 years. Okay. And in this model, inflation is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? It's just a thing. It's a feature of the world, or it's a thing that happens. There's nothing noteworthy about it. Okay. Now, if we were to draw the graph, what we would want are two axes, and we would have the price level on the y-axis, and we have GDP, y, on the x-axis, right? And at some level, this is very similar to the supply and demand model that we've been working with, where we had, price here and quantity here. And what you've basically got are the sort of like aggregate versions of price and the aggregate version of quantity. But I should note that these are two very completely different models, but they look very, very similar. Okay, and so what we have is an aggregate demand curve that slopes down and to the right. And what aggregate demand is it's a line. It shows us the relationship between the price level and the amount of final goods and services consumed by households, firms, and governments. Okay? And so what it is, and customers abroad. And customers abroad. Okay? And so what it's showing us is the total amount of spending in dollars that all these that basically everyone in an economy will do at various price levels. Okay, so at this price level, people will purchase this many goods and services, right? Or this dollar value's worth of goods and services. And if the price level were to fall, we would see people purchasing more things. And the way to think about that is to imagine if you woke up, let's say tomorrow morning, and all the prices in the entire world had been cut in half, right? But your bank account still had the same number of dollars in it, okay? So if all the prices are now half, and you still have the same number of dollars, right, which would be this, then you would buy more things, right? Okay, so the idea here, right, is that if the price level changes and everything else stays the same, then people will buy more or less things. If the price level decreases, people buy more stuff. If the price level rises, people buy less stuff, okay? And we can explain this, right? And so that's sort of one way that we can look about that. The way I just described it, or what I just described there, is what economists call the wealth effect. Okay, and the idea here is that if the price level changes and you have the same number of dollars as before, then you will be, let's do this, less wealthy if price level goes up, and more wealthy if the price level goes down, okay? And so what it says is that if the price level falls, you can now afford more of everything, and so you purchase some more things. If the price level rises, you can afford less of everything, and so then you purchase fewer things, okay? And this would be a change in consumption. Okay, and so what we're basically just saying, right, is that aggregate demand slopes down and to the right because as the price level falls, people want to buy more things, or maybe they want to invest in more things, or net exports will increase because more foreign purchasers want to buy our things relative to theirs if our prices are falling and theirs are staying the same. Okay, so let's get into factors that shift aggregate demand. Okay, and here there's two ways to think about this. I'm going to present sort of both of them real quick, and you're free to choose either method, either framework that helps you think about this. Okay, there's two ways. Personally, I like this way, but I'm going to show you both. Okay, so just like with regular demand, aggregate demand can shift too. And in this framework, we have four, and these are exogenous changes consumption, investment, government spending, or net exports. Okay, and what I mean by exogenous, okay, so exogenous in this framework or in this context means outside the model, or non-price level. Okay, so if consumption changes for non-price reasons, then aggregate demand will change. And if investment changes for non-price reasons, right, aggregate demand changes. And if government spending changes for non-price reasons, aggregate demand changes. And if net exports changes for non-price reasons, then aggregate demand will change. Okay, an endogenous change would be a change in CIG or NX that is caused by changes in the price level, and that would be a movement along the aggregate demand curve. But an exogenous change is a non-price reason for changing CIG or NX. Okay, so let's think about this. What about changes in consumption? So let's suppose that everyone starts saving for retirement. Okay, so if everyone starts saving more money for retirement, perhaps because they're afraid of the future, or they're just nervous, or whatever's going on, then aggregate demand will shift to the left. Okay, and the reason why is because people aren't spending as much money as they used to be. Okay, and so if they're not spending as much money as they used to be, then we would show that as a decrease in aggregate demand. So you can think of the aggregate demand curve as representing the total amount of spending that's going on in an economy. And here we're saying that this decreased. So we have to decrease aggregate demand. Okay. Now, excuse me, very sorry about that. So, what if all of a sudden we were in a like the stock market starts to explode, right? The stock market is just rising up and up and up every single day. What will we do then? Well, there we would expect everyone to start spending more money, right? And so we would show that as the opposite, an increase in aggregate demand. Okay, or what if the government lowers income taxes, right? So if the government lowered income taxes, everyone would have more money of their paycheck left over at the end of the day, and we would all be able to spend more money, and so aggregate demand would shift out to the right. Okay, and if they raised income taxes, we would have less money, and they would shift over to the left. Okay, but we can also have exogenous changes in investment. And so what if like a technology company introduces a brand new line of computers that is just amazing. It totally renders obsolete all the supply chain management workers in the world. Okay, well, it's probably going to be the case that a lot of businesses are going to want to buy those new computers and invest in the capital that they have. And so their investment would just increase, which would shift aggregate demand to the right. Okay, and if businesses suddenly became pessimistic about the future and start saving money, they stop investing in new technology and such, aggregate demand would shift back to the left. Okay. Changing government purchases. This is sort of the quick and dirty way of doing things, and because we can very quickly, change aggregate demand by changing government spending. Okay, and so the idea here is that if we increase government purchases, aggregate demand will shift to the right, and if we decrease government purchases, aggregate demand shifts to the left. Okay, so people like Paul Krugman say that we should not reduce government spending just yet because we need to increase aggregate demand in his mind. The Republicans in Congress seem to say that we need to reduce federal spending, which would be a decrease in aggregate demand. Okay, and we'll discuss that later on in the semester as well in more detail once we have this model sort of fully developed. Okay. And then the last one is an exogenous change in net exports. And this is probably one of the easier ones to think about. So think about this. If Europe and Asia, let's say, all of a sudden enter a recession, they're probably not going to buy too many American goods, right? They're probably going to stop buying American products, and so that would reduce our exports, which would reduce our net exports, and so aggregate demand would shift to the left, right? And once Europe recovers from their recession, then our aggregate demand would shift back to the right. Okay. Now, the other way to think about it, which is to me a little bit easier, is that there are three factors. Okay, the first one would be changes in government policy. Okay, and this is saying that if government increases or decreases spending, or if they increase or decrease taxes, that will shift aggregate demand. Okay, just like what we talked about over here. This is just a summary of the taxes from the exogenous changes in consumption and the changing government purchases in one. Okay, the second factor will be changes in the expectations of households and firms. And what this says is that if households or firms are suddenly more nervous about the future, they reduce their spending. Okay, which is the same as the exogenous changes in C&I, right? Same thing again. And if we become more confident about the future, we start to believe that we're going to get a raise or a bonus or a promotion or anything like that, then we start to spend more money, right? So if we expect the future to be great, then C and I will both increase. If we expect the future to be terrible, C and I will decrease as we start saving more money. And then the last one, 3, is changes in foreign variables, which is basically the same as this one here. Okay, so this is saying that if exchange rates change, or if price levels in different countries change, or if Europe or some other or place enters a recession or a boom, this can affect U.S. aggregate demand as well. Okay, so there's two ways to sort of think about things that shift aggregate demand. They're not mutually exclusive. You can think about all 7 of these factors if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. I tend to think in terms of this one, just because I find it easier to think about than these, but you're free to do it any way you want. Okay, any way that you want to go through this and think about it is perfectly fine. Okay.